The elevator in the Hargrove Building had 42 floors, and Walter Pruitt had spent 11 years never going above the 14th. He was a maintenance man. Not the kind they put in the brochures, not the crisp uniform, radio on the hip kind, but the kind who showed up before anyone else arrived, fixed what was broken before anyone noticed it had been breaking, and left without anyone remembering he'd been there. That was, more or less, how he preferred it. Walter Pruitt was 58 years old. He drove a 2009 Dodge pickup that had a crack in the windshield he kept meaning to fix. He wore the same 4 flannel shirts on rotation and owned exactly one tie, which he'd last worn to his son Daniel's high school graduation 6 years ago. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Parkdale, split the rent with nobody, and was, by every visible measure, completely unremarkable. What people in the building did not know, what Walter had never volunteered and had no intention of volunteering, was that he had built and sold a construction company at 51 for more money than he'd known what to do with, that he'd spent the years since quietly, deliberately choosing this. The early mornings, the physical work, the invisibility. After 30 years of being the man in the room that everyone wanted something from, invisible felt like breathing again. He had a daughter named Megan who called him every Sunday and worried he was lonely. He told her he wasn't. Mostly that was true. The call came on a Tuesday in November. The boiler in the mechanical room on the 40th floor had been flagging irregular pressure readings for 3 days, and the previous technician had logged it as resolved without actually resolving it. Walter had spotted the discrepancy in the maintenance records that morning the way he spotted most things, quietly, without announcement, and had put himself on the job before anyone asked him to. He gathered his tools, took the service elevator to 40, and walked into a floor he hadn't been on in 3 years. The executive level of Hargrove Building was a different atmosphere entirely. Lower floors had the comfortable clutter of working offices, takeout containers, sticky notes, the kind of organized chaos that meant people were actually in there doing things. The 40th floor had the kind of silence that money bought deliberately, pale oak paneling, art on the walls that didn't try to be liked, carpet so thick it absorbed the sound of his boots. The mechanical room was at the north end, past the boardroom, past the executive assistant pods, past the corner office with the glass walls that looked out over the lake. Walter was almost past that office when he heard it. Not words, not a voice exactly, more like the sound a person makes when they've been holding something for a very long time, and for one unguarded moment they stop. He stopped walking. The door was open 4 inches. Through the gap he could see a woman standing at the window with her back to him, one hand pressed flat against the glass, looking out at Lake Ontario in the gray November light. Her shoulders were drawn up in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with the effort of keeping herself together. Eleanor Marsh was the CEO of Hargrove Capital. Walter knew her the way everyone in the building knew her, from the framed profile in the lobby, from the company-wide emails with her signature at the bottom, from the occasional sighting in the parking garage where she walked fast and alone and nodded to no one. She was 53. She had been running this company for 9 years. She had a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered, and it was not a warm one. She did not look like her reputation right now. Walter should have kept walking. Every reasonable instinct said keep walking. You don't stop in doorways on the 40th floor. You don't acknowledge what you're not supposed to see. You do the job, you fix the boiler, you leave. He kept walking. He fixed the boiler. It took 40 minutes, a corroded sensor coupling, which was exactly what he'd suspected. He replaced it, ran the pressure diagnostic twice, logged the repair properly this time, and packed his tools. On the way back through the hall, the office door was still open 4 inches. She was sitting at her desk now, reading something. Her expression returned to whatever composed and deliberate face she showed the world. The moment at the window was gone as though it hadn't happened. Walter walked past without stopping. He was back on the 14th floor by noon. He thought about it more than he should have for the rest of that day, not in any way he could explain to someone else. Not concern, exactly. Not curiosity in the intrusive sense. More like the way you notice when something structural is under more strain than it appears designed to carry. He'd spent 30 years in construction. He understood the difference between a building that looked fine and a building that was quietly failing inside the walls. He didn't know Eleanor Marsh. She didn't know he existed. That was the natural order of things on the 40th floor. The next morning at 6:15, he found a work order on his desk. 40th floor executive suite. Recurring issue with the radiator thermostat in the main office. Previous service incomplete. Please advise. Walter read it twice. He didn't remember seeing a radiator complaint in the system. He pulled up the logs on his terminal and found the ticket had been submitted the previous afternoon, time-stamped 4:47 p.m. He took the service elevator to 40. Eleanor Marsh was already at her desk when he knocked on the open door at 6:30. She looked up without surprise, as though she'd been expecting him. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. Walter paused. In 11 years, no one on the executive floor had known his last name without checking a badge. "The thermostat," he said, holding up his bag. "Yes," she gestured toward the radiator unit along the south wall. "It's been running cold for 2 weeks. I've mentioned it twice." Walter nodded and crossed to the unit. He crouched down and opened the access panel. The thermostat was a straightforward fix. A calibration drift, common in older building systems. He could have it done in 20 minutes. He worked in silence. Eleanor Marsh worked in silence on the other side of the room. The only sounds were the scratch of her pen and the occasional distant sound of the city 40 floors below. At the 7-minute mark, she spoke. "You were in the hallway yesterday morning." Walter didn't look up from the panel. "I was fixing the boiler in the mechanical room." "I know," she said. "I saw you walk past." He waited to see where this was going. "The door was open," she said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an accusation either. It was the statement of someone who had decided to acknowledge a fact rather than pretend it didn't exist. "I didn't stop," Walter said. "No," she said. "You didn't." He finished recalibrating the thermostat and ran a test cycle. The radiator began producing even heat within 90 seconds. He replaced the access panel and stood up. "It was a corroded sensor coupling on the boiler," he said. "The previous technician marked it resolved without replacing the part. I've put the correct part number in the log so it doesn't get missed again." Eleanor Marsh looked at him steadily. She had dark eyes that assessed things quickly and thoroughly, the kind of eyes that had spent years in rooms where reading people accurately was the difference between a good decision and a catastrophic one. "No one has ever explained a repair to me before," she said. "They just fix it and leave." "It's your building," Walter said. "Seems like you'd want to know." There was a brief pause. "How long have you worked here?" she asked. 11 years. She didn't say anything to that, but something in her expression shifted fractionally. Not softened exactly, more like recalibrated. "Thank you, Mr. Pruitt," she said. Walter picked up his bag and left. He was almost at the service elevator when he heard her voice behind him, not loud, not directed at anyone in particular. More like something said to the room itself, I thought. 11 years, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. 3 days later, he was summoned to the 40th floor again. Not a maintenance ticket this time. A phone call to the facilities desk from executive administration. Mr. Pruitt was requested in Miss Marsh's office at 9 a.m. Walter set down his coffee and sat with that for a moment. In 11 years, he had never been summoned. He had been called to fix things. He had been ignored in hallways. He had been thanked in the distracted, reflexive way people thanked service workers when they remembered to. He had never been summoned. He took the regular elevator this time. Eleanor Marsh's executive assistant, a brisk woman named Helen, who had probably personally organized every hour of the last decade of Marsh's professional life, showed him in without comment and closed the door behind him. Eleanor was standing at the window again. Different posture this time, controlled, deliberate. The posture of someone who had chosen where to stand and why. She turned when he came in. "Sit down," she said. There were 2 chairs in front of her desk. Walter sat in the one on the right. He rested his hands on his knees and waited, the way he'd learned to wait, without filling the silence, without performing patience. Just actually being still. She remained standing. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it honestly." "All right," he said. "Why didn't you say anything?" "In the hallway." Walter considered the question carefully. "Because it wasn't my place. Most people would have found a way to make it their place," she said. A comment. A look. Something to let me know they'd seen. "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her directly. "Because whatever was happening in that office was yours, not mine. I was passing through." Eleanor Marsh studied him the way she must have studied balance sheets and acquisition proposals, looking for the error, the inconsistency, the number that didn't belong. Whatever she found or didn't find, she moved away from the window and sat down behind her desk. "Do you know what this company does, Mr. Pruitt?" she asked. "Real estate investment management," he said. "Commercial and mixed use. You expanded into infrastructure debt about 4 years ago." A slight pause. "Most maintenance staff aren't familiar with the infrastructure debt portfolio. I read the annual report," he said. "It's in the lobby." Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "I built this company from a single commercial property in Mississauga," she said, with the tone of someone who wasn't bragging, someone who was trying to explain something. "I was 31 years old. I had a business degree, a reasonable inheritance, and a belief that I understood something about real estate that other people were missing." She paused. "I was right, as it turned out, which made everything easier in some ways and much more difficult in others." Walter didn't say anything. He could hear that she was building towards something. 22 years later, I manage $4 billion in assets, employ 640 people, and sit in rooms with some of the most powerful people in this country. She looked at her hands, resting on the desk. "I cannot remember the last time anyone in the list looked at me and saw a person instead of a decision." The room was very quiet. "I don't say that looking for sympathy," she added quickly. "I say it because it's true, and I've spent a long time not saying it out loud, and apparently watching someone choose not to make something of what they saw makes you want to say true things." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want from me, Miss Marsh?" The directness of it seemed to land exactly right. "An honest answer," she said. "When you walked past that door, what did you see?" He didn't look away. "I saw someone having a hard moment in private, trying to keep it private, that's all. I saw someone who looked tired," he said. "The kind of tired that isn't about sleep." Eleanor Marsh was very still. "I looked like that," she said finally. Not quite a question. "Yes," he said. "You did." She didn't respond immediately. She looked past him toward the door, as though considering something or reconsidering it. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said. "David. We'd been married 26 years. She said it the way people said things they'd said many times to many people in professional contexts, cleanly without inflection, the information stripped of weight through repetition, and then something slipped. Yesterday was his birthday. Walter didn't move. He didn't say he was sorry, didn't reach for the usual words, because she didn't look like someone who needed the usual words. She looked like someone who had heard them so many times they'd stopped meaning anything. "He would have been 58, she said. "Same age as you, actually, if you'll forgive the assumption." "I'm 58, he confirmed. She nodded slightly. Then she seemed to make a decision, some internal door closing on whatever she'd just allowed to open. "I have a proposal," she said, her voice returned to its professional register. "I've been trying to understand something about this company. Specifically, why our mid-level and support staff retention has declined 14% over 3 years despite competitive compensation. My HR consultants give me reports. The reports give me trends. None of it tells me what's actually happening in the building." She opened a folder on her desk. "I'd like to bring you onto a small internal advisory group. Confidential. 4 people, including yourself. Your role would be to tell me what you see from where you are. Honestly, without filtering it for what you think I want to hear. You'd keep your current position. There would be additional compensation. And you would be the only person on this committee who actually works in this building below the executive level." Walter looked at the folder. He didn't reach for it. "Why me?" he said. "Because you've been here 11 years and you've never asked for anything," she said. "Because you fixed a problem that someone else falsified as solved, and logged it correctly so it wouldn't happen again, when no one would have known if you hadn't. And because when you had the opportunity to make something of a private moment that would have given you leverage, you walked past. That's not leverage," he said. "That's just a person having a hard day." "Yes," she said, "exactly." He looked at the folder again. He thought about Megan, who called every Sunday and asked if he was all right. He thought about the Dodge with the cracked windshield and the 4 flannel shirts and the apartment in Parkdale and the careful, quiet life he had built for reasons that had made complete sense to him at 51 and still mostly made sense now. "Can I think about it?" he said. "Take the week," she said. She pushed the folder across the desk toward him. He picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He stood. Miss Marsh," he said, "if you don't mind my saying, Go ahead. Whatever you were carrying yesterday in front of that window, you don't have to look like that alone." He paused. "I don't mean that personally. I just mean there are people in this building who would recognize it if you let them. You might be surprised." She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "no one has said anything remotely that direct to me in longer than I can recall. I'll let you know by Friday," he said. He left, closing the door behind him. The service elevator felt different going down, not smaller or larger, just different, the way a space feels when you've carried something into it and left with something else. He called Megan that evening, which was a Wednesday, not their usual Sunday. She picked up on the second ring, already slightly alarmed by the deviation. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said. "I just wanted to talk." "You never just want to talk," she said, but he could hear the smile in it. "What happened?" He told her about the work order, about the thermostat, about the 2 conversations on the 40th floor. He left out some of the texture of it, the window, the birthday, the particular weight of the silence in that office, because some things were not his to share even in summary. What he told her was enough. "She wants your opinion on company culture," Megan said. That appears to be the situation, yes, Dad." A pause. "You know more about running a company than anyone in that building. They don't know that. Does it matter?" He sat with that for a moment. His kitchen was quiet. Outside, Parkdale was doing what Parkdale did on Wednesday evenings. The distant sound of a streetcar, someone's dog, a burst of laughter from the apartment above. "She seems like someone who doesn't have a lot of people telling her true things," he said. "Neither did you," Megan said. "When you were running everything, remember? You used to say everyone stopped being honest with you once you got big enough that they were afraid of you." He did remember. It was one of the reasons he'd sold. "Call her Friday," Megan said. "Say yes." He didn't commit to anything. He told her he'd think about it. He made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the folder. Inside was a project brief, 8 pages, precisely organized. Goals, methodology, timeline, scope. He read it twice. It was thorough and genuinely well considered, and addressed the kind of systemic problem that consultants almost never manage to actually identify, because consultants came from the outside, and the problem was in the grain of the thing, the daily texture of it, which you could only see if you were inside it and low enough down to be ignored. On the last page, at the bottom, in handwriting that was small and deliberate, "Thank you for walking past." E.M. Walter read it once, set the folder down, stared at his kitchen wall for a while. On Friday morning, he called the number on the card that had been tucked into the folder. Helen from Executive Administration transferred him through. "Mr. Pruitt," Eleanor said. "I'll do it," he said. A brief pause. "Good," she said. "First meeting is Tuesday evening, 6 o'clock. Helen will send you the room. All right. And Mr. Pruitt." A slightly different quality in her voice. Not softer, but more honest. "I reviewed your building access records this morning. In 11 years, you've been logged in before 6 a.m. every day you've worked. Sundays included sometimes. Building doesn't care what day it is," he said. "Things still break." "Yes," she said, "they do." A pause. "I'll see you Tuesday." She ended the call. The first meeting had 5 people in it. Walter, a woman from HR named Sylvie, a mid-level operations manager named Frank, a communications director named Pruitt, and Eleanor herself, who ran the meeting with the crisp efficiency of someone who respected other people's time by never wasting it. Walter mostly listened. He asked 2 questions, both specific, both about things he'd observed on the lower floors over years. Eleanor stopped both times and wrote something down. After the others had gone, he was slow packing his notes into his bag. Eleanor was still at the table, reviewing something. "You were quiet tonight," she said without looking up. "I was taking it in," he said. "You asked the right questions." "Sylvie is worried about something she didn't say in the meeting," he said. "She said her piece about the exit interview data, but there's something else." She chose her words carefully in a way that suggested she's tested what she says in these kinds of rooms before and been burned by it. Eleanor looked up from her papers. "How do you know that?" "I ran a company for 20 years, he said simply. "You learn to watch what people don't say." The silence that followed was of a different quality than the silences earlier in their acquaintance. Something in it had shifted. "You ran a company," Eleanor said carefully. This was not a question. "I built one," he said. "Construction. Sold it 7 years ago." She set down her pen. She looked at him with an expression that was working to remain neutral and not entirely succeeding. "And now you're fixing boilers," he said. "Yes." "Why?" He considered how much of the true answer to give. He decided on most of it. "Because when I was running things, I forgot what it was like to be useful with my hands. I forgot what it was like to walk into a building and fix the actual problem, instead of the version of the problem that got filtered up through 4 management layers until it barely resembled the original thing." He paused. "And because I wanted to be somewhere that nobody wanted anything from me." Eleanor Marsh was very still. "I understand that," she said quietly. "I know you do," he said. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the 42nd floor of the Hargrove Building was silent. The building settling into its November night, the faint sound of the wind off the lake finding the gaps in the old window seals. David was in construction, she said. Unprompted. Not running it, he did the actual work. He was a carpenter. Finish work mostly. Trim and cabinetry. She looked at the table. People at these meetings used to ask him what he did and he'd tell them, and you could watch their interest just drain out of their faces. She paused. He never minded. I minded for him. He sounds like he knew something, Walter said. He knew a lot of things, she said. He was the only person in my life who talked to me like I was a regular person and not a professional outcome. She paused. It's a harder thing to find than you'd think. I know, he said. They walked to the elevator together. The hallway was empty and dim, the overnight lighting giving everything a quieter quality. Same time next Tuesday, she said. I'll be here, he said. The doors opened and she stepped in. She turned to face forward the way people did in elevators, looking at the closed doors. Mr. Pruitt, she said, just before the doors closed. Walter, he said, a beat. Something in her expression arrived at a place it hadn't been before, a little less guarded. A small, genuine thing. Walter, she said. Thank you for being honest. The doors closed. He stood in the empty hallway for a moment, listening to the elevator descend. He took the stairs down. 14 floors, which he'd done hundreds of times, but tonight he noticed the sound of his boots on the concrete landings differently. Not background noise, but the actual sound, present and specific. He pushed through the lobby door into the November cold, crossed the parking lot to the Dodge, started the engine and sat for a moment while the heat came up. He called Megan when he got home. She picked up on the first ring this time. Well, she said. It went fine, he said. That's all I get? For now, he said. She laughed, the way she'd laughed since she was small, unself-conscious and full. You know, most retired business owners move to Florida. They play golf. They have opinions about their grandchildren. I don't have grandchildren yet. Working on it, she said. Be patient. He smiled, which she couldn't see but probably knew anyway. Good night, Megan. Night, Dad. The weeks settled into a new rhythm. The building in the morning, the regular work, the service elevator and the HVAC units, and the tickets that needed proper logging. Tuesday evenings on the 40th floor, occasionally Thursday. The committee was doing real work. Sylvie opened up in the third meeting about what she'd been holding back, which turned out to be a significant pattern of suppressed internal complaints at the management level. And Eleanor had listened without expression, but had then spent 10 minutes asking the most precise questions Walter had heard asked in a meeting in years. In the margins of those evenings, he and Eleanor Marsh talked about the building, about the city, about what David had done with a piece of cherry wood he'd found in a salvage yard and turned into a cabinet that still stood in the hallway of the house she hadn't been able to sell and didn't fully understand why, about what Walter had done with the company before he sold it and what it had felt like afterward. The particular quiet of no longer being needed in that way, which was both relief and its own kind of grief. They didn't name what they were doing. There was no particular moment where the thing between them became something you could point to. It was more like watching a room warm up. You don't see the heat. You just notice at some point that you're no longer cold. One Thursday in January, after the others had gone, Eleanor asked him what he was doing for the long weekend. Megan's coming up from Hamilton, he said. She'll cook something ambitious and I'll pretend I couldn't have managed without it. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Eleanor said. She is, he said. She worries about me, which is unnecessary, but she comes by it honestly. He paused. What about you? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I have a property in Prince Edward County, a house on the water. I haven't been out since last spring. She looked toward the dark window. David and I used to go every January, no matter the weather. He liked it in winter, said it was the only time the county was actually quiet. Sounds right, Walter said. I haven't gone alone, she said. Not as an explanation, just as a fact she was deciding to say out loud. First time for things, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The thing in the room was quiet and present, and neither of them said what it was, but they both knew what it was. Maybe, she said finally. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Eleanor, he said. First time he'd used her name. It landed in the room, and they both let it. She looked at him steadily. Go to the county, he said, even alone, especially alone. You'll know when you're ready for it not to be alone. He left. The elevator was empty and silent all the way to the ground floor. Outside, the January cold off the lake hit him full in the face, and he walked to the Dodge and drove home through streets that were clean and dark and quiet. He didn't feel invisible. He hadn't felt invisible in some weeks, though he hadn't said so to anyone, not even Megan. But the truth of it was that something had shifted on the 40th floor of that building, in the spaces between committee meetings and careful conversations, and the particular quality of silence that existed between two people who had each been alone in their own way for a long time, and recognized something in the other that they'd stopped expecting to find. Whatever it was real. And real things, Walter had learned, did not need to be named right away. They just needed to be allowed to exist. He was 58 years old. He had a cracked windshield he kept meaning to fix. He had 4 flannel shirts and a daughter who called on Sundays and a kitchen table, where he read folders by lamplight, and a building that needed him at 6 a.m. regardless of the day. And on the 42nd floor above the city and the cold lake in the January dark, he thought there was probably a woman standing at a window, looking out at something she was deciding to move toward instead of away from. That seemed, to Walter, like enough for now.